One of the ideas that I knew I wanted to play with when I came to Centre 3 into the Vibra Fusion Lab, just this simple interplay between light and fabric. It's well known that light has this unbelievable ability to change the object it's lighting depending on a simple shift in angle or position. As soon as you move your light source off to the side, then it becomes a kind of sculptural tool. The other element was I knew that I wanted to play with semi-translucent fabric because the other thing that's interesting about light's relationship to materials is that it can change their opacity. It can reveal kind of hidden forms and hidden translucencies that weren't obvious before. So those two things are kind of magical to me. The idea that simply changing the play of light across the surface of the fabric can change how that fabric reveals itself to you. I had loads of recommendations to Ottawa Street, the garment district of Hamilton. So I headed up there and I found this bit of cloth, which has got this beautiful kind of gradation from light blue to dark blue. Grew up in Cornwall in the UK by the sea. This particular piece of fabric kind of chimed straight away. Memories of the ocean, the shifting opacity of fabric and light's interplay with surface depending on where you light it from. Those three things are kind of came together, and this is what this piece is starting to explore. And more broadly speaking as well, this is the first piece in the open studio because it's about thresholds. It's about thresholds of memory. So the form and the shadow and the translucency is constantly shifting, driven just by the presence of this simple fan on the floor. So it's really just a kind of invitation to sit and to imagine, and just to kind of be with this ever-shifting form for a time. The other thing that's going on is that there's a soundscape. It starts off with a field recording from a cove in Cornwall where I grew up. So the sounds of the sea just lapping on the shore. But then it kind of moves imperceptibly into other sympathetic sounds, which are actually sonified recordings of cosmic sound. There's the Leonid's meteor shower in there. There's the chirping of a pulsar that you can hear just now, which sounds like an early morning bird song. And there's various recordings that I gathered online from this unbelievable movement that's looking to kind of sonify the unheard sounds of space. And it just dawned on me that, yeah, there's this beautiful synchronicity between the openness and hope and possibility of the ocean and the kind of vastness and potential of these sounds of the cosmos. I just want people to kind of sit and get transported for a moment and imagine what they want to imagine. I'm hoping that it's a kind of meditative, calming space, and that people kind of bring their own conceptions and ideas to the piece. So this piece is called Penetration, which is another classic effect of magic. So penetration is the ability of one object to pass impossibly through another. A really great example of that was Harry Houdini in the early 1900s. Stood on a bare stage in the middle of a theatre in New York City, fully surrounded by people, and he passed magically through a brick wall on stage. So that was the kind of inspiration for this, the way that light refracts as it passes through water and creates all these kind of unbelievable, unexpected images. So it only exists, at this focal length, with this light source, with this particular bowl, with that amount of water, with that mirror, at that distance from the wall. There's nothing intrinsic about this image. It's created kind of by this very specific setup. This string, which changes as the air ebbs and flows around the space, and as people interact and come closer to it, their footsteps will change the image that's reflected on the wall as well. A piece of string is also a bit of a nod to another thing in my childhood, which was kind of grew up surrounded by strange beliefs. As a child, I would go dowsing for water and play with pendulums and all that sort of stuff. And whilst I don't really believe in that anymore, there's something about the stories that those moments can tell, and about the kind of the myth making that you can kind of generate in the world that's really intriguing. And I kind of miss that, those early days of belief and the stories that will tell you, or the stories that belief lets you tell yourself. Each of these tracks is a sonified recording of a nebula, a galaxy. The idea of this just appearing in a bit of scrubland, it brings something so monumental down, and to deliberately have it kind of low grade, low tech, because you're never going to be able to recreate the grandeur of the actual Northern Lights. Bit of learning from magic is that you don't want to show off skill, because a certain amount of like flourish, as we'd call it, rolling coins through your fingers or fancy shuffles is good because it kind of shows expertise. But if you demonstrate too much skill and you're too slick, then the idea is that there's a thing called the too perfect theory, which is that if it's too perfect, then it can't be possible, therefore there's a trick to it. The method in this is like unbelievably complex, and this is a generative Northern Lights. This is based on a random noise generator, which is creating kind of particles, and those particles have got form and texture applied to them. So there's unbelievable maths happening behind the scenes, but I think it's way better to just underplay that and degrade the quality and just have it on this little 1980s TV. And this sort of like broader project, which is like bringing macro scale beauty, the things like the Northern Lights and rainbows, that they are literally nature's magic. The idea of like bringing them down and bottling them up and putting them in unloved places. This is called levitation. So each of these work in progress pieces in this open studio are named after one of the kind of fundamental effects of magic. This is about using light and fabric to pick up the kind of unseen currents in the air, a nod back to my childhood, because growing up my dad used to make kites. For me, kind of learning magic as a kid as well, flying a kite was the kind of closest we get to a sensation of flying, an attempt to just create a kind of joyful meditative space just out of light, fabric and air. But it's an interesting process to make it, because there's an element of having to sculpt it live, because every single change that you make, one of these bricks moves, or if you add a new piece of fabric or you knot a new bit of twine, every tiny change has a huge kind of swirling knock-on effect to everything else. So you're having to kind of structure this thing in the moment and kind of tend to it. So kind of like to think that it feels like it's a little bit alive, because you're having to kind of nurture it and allow it to achieve its full potential.